Welcome back, America, to Sound Retirement Radio, where we bring you concepts, ideas, and strategies designed to help you achieve clarity, confidence, and freedom as you prepare for and transition through retirement. And now, here is your host, Jason Parker.
America, welcome back to another round of Sound Retirement Radio. You're listening to episode number 444. It's my good fortune to bring Jann Freed onto the program, Dr. Jann Freed, and I think you guys are going to really love this episode. But before we get into it, let's take a minute to renew our mind. This verse is from Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. What happens if you eat Christmas ornaments? You get tinselitis. What do you call a cat on the beach during Christmas time? Sandy Claus. In today's podcast, I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Jann Freed, an expert in helping people live intentionally and reflect on their impact. Dr. Freed shared powerful insights on building meaningful relationships in the second half of life and explained how embracing the reality of our mortality can inspire us to live more fully. Her words remind me of something my mentor used to tell me. He said, "Jason, life is not a dress rehearsal. This is the real deal, baby. You get one shot. Go give it everything you've got with everything you've got." This conversation is a valuable reminder to approach life with purpose, passion, and a commitment to making every moment count. Here's Jann's bio. Dr. Jann is an author, speaker, and thought leader devoted to taking leaders to the next level. She is also a contributor to Forbes.com, where she writes about the non-financial aspects of retirement. Jann is a professor of business management emerita at Central College in Pell, Iowa. Jann actively works to leave her breadcrumb legacy daily. When not working on breadcrumbs in her own life, Jann enjoys photography and spending time with family and friends. And without any further ado, here is my interview with Dr. Jann Freed. It's my good fortune to have Dr. Jann Freed on the program. Jann, I wanted to have you on the program because you've got a new book out called Breadcrumb Legacy, How Great Leaders Live a Life Worth Remembering. And tell us a little bit about why you wrote this book.
This book basically came out of my previous book, which was called Leading with Wisdom, Sage Advice from 100 Experts. And I actually interviewed more than 100, but my editor loved 100. And each of the chapters is a theme that emerged in the research. And one of the chapters that really resonated with people, because I had several speaking engagements and workshops, I developed a workshop called Leaders Live Their Legacy, which is the chapter in the book. And people really found that interesting. And I would ask people in workshops, when I'm speaking, when do we leave our legacy? And people would say, well, when we leave. And I'd say, leave what? Leave the earth, we die, that's true. Leave a job, we retire, that's true. I'd say, what happens when I leave this meeting today, when I leave this room today? I'm leaving some of my legacy with you today. And out of that, I developed this concept of we're leaving our legacy daily in bite-sized pieces, in breadcrumbs, and they accumulate. And often people think of legacy as something very big, monumental, significant. A legacy is just the impact and influence you're having on others, and we're having that on a daily basis. And it can be positive. It could be negative. It's not always positive.
Yeah. Why do you suppose that topic resonates with people? Why is it important for people to want to leave a legacy or live a legacy?
I think it's resonating because death and mortality, and I've done a lot of work in that area. It really helps you anytime you've had like a near-death experience, often called NDEs. It's the first thing that puts life in perspective. All of a sudden, your priorities are very clear. And so I think people are really thinking about, what difference am I making? What's my life matter? And I will tell you, COVID brought death front and center. People, whether they had relatives, friends, it's almost like everyone knew someone who had a bad experience or died from COVID. And so, my dad died during COVID. I don't want to say that it was because of COVID, but he was 95 and a half. I think it was COVID related. And so I think we're still trying to figure out the impact that COVID had on people. So I think death became front and center. People of all ages had a chance to kind of pause and think about, that kind of leads us into talking about quiet quitting or the great resignation. People thinking about, is this really how I want to spend my life? Do I want to keep doing this kind of work? People really had a chance to reevaluate.
I remember, as you're saying that, I remember that video, the speech that Steve Jobs gave at the Stanford graduation. And he said, death is the best invention of life. It clears out the old to make way for the new. And it does force you to live with some urgency. Is there any questions around legacy, questions that you ask people to help them understand, maybe get more clarity around purpose and how to be intentional about the way that they live? Are there good questions that you've discovered over the years?
Yeah. Well, actually, one chapter in the book is called, and to me, this is the key question, is what's going to get you up in the morning?
Mm-hmm.
Because people will say, in fact, I was having lunch just yesterday with a group of women, career women, who have, for the most part, retired, and were really talking to me about what the issues are. And the main issue is, really, what do you do with your time? If you've got the money figured out, what do you do with your time? How do you
Right.
structure your day? What's going to get you up in the morning? And I might say that I write about the non-financial aspects of retirement. I'm recently a contributor to Forbes.com, and that's what I write about, the non-financial aspects of retirement. Because if you've got the money part figured out, it's everything else you're worried about. So I think the key questions, have to do with, like you said, purpose, meaning, how are you going to structure your day? What's going to get you up in the morning? And a lot of times people talk about purpose with a big P, what I've got to do something. And again, very important. Not necessarily. I mean, like writing for Forbes now, I think about it. I go to bed thinking about it. I wake up thinking about articles I want to write. I mean, for me, reading, writing, learning, that's what gets me going. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
every day I want to learn something, and that keeps me going. So it can be just a small P, it could be something that you're involved in with volunteer or the community or um, your church or your faith community. Or it can be something very little, like, my piano teacher who's in her 80s is struggling with cancer, and, I take him dinner once or twice a week. It could just be something little, like I'm thinking about, oh gosh, I need to go to the store because I need to buy something to make them for dinner. Just, it doesn't have to be anything really, really, but if it's meaningful to you, it's important.
Mm. Yeah, this is the reason I wanted to have you on the show, because retirement's a huge transition for people, and oftentimes many of the people that listen to this show, they do have the finance part figured out. They've got that part taken care of, but there's a lot of
Yes.
people that aren't ready to retire because they don't know how they're going to spend their time. So when you're writing these articles for Forbes, talking about the non-financial aspects, what is it that gets people out of bed? What is it that's motivating them or inspiring them or giving them a sense of belonging and meaning? Where do you find people? What are people doing to experience that?
Well, I think the key is curiosity.
Mm.
I think that's a key word, because curiosity gets you to ask questions. It gets you to learn new things. I say to people, because I do coaching along this lines, I say, well, this is, start experimenting or discover, or, talk to people who are doing interesting things. There's more to life than playing golf and traveling, because actually, one of my role models in this work is Richard Leider, Leider, and he's done a lot of writing. He's written a lot of books, and I've attended workshops with him and read all of his books. And he basically says that his research has indicated that as people get older and, close to retirement age, meaning trumps money and significance trumps success.
Mm.
So, it's really about, so I say to, I try to coach people, start start asking questions, start experimenting, discover, sign up for some classes or talk to people, interview, informally, meet people for coffee. Who's doing something interesting? I actually have a top 10 list, if people go to my website and, sign up for my email or I have a newsletter once a month. If they sign up for my newsletter or send me an email, I'll send them my top 10 tips. But I also wanted to say that I'm also an alum of the Modern Elder Academy.
Hmm.
And that is started by Chip Conley. He wrote the foreword to my book, but he calls his academy, the Modern Elder Academy, the first midlife wisdom school.
Hmm.
And so I'm an alum of that, and I'm just currently going through another certification to become it's called Navigating Transitions, TQ Coach, Transition Quotient Coach, and kind of like EQ, IQ, this is TQ, to help people through transitions, whether that's a divorce, whether that's, they've laid off from their job or they're retiring, or, they've gone through a significant death in the family or something, some kind of major life transition.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll be done with that in January. So this is definitely my focus, my passion. So that would be my advice. Yeah.
I listened to a couple of the podcasts where you had been guests, and I watched the TED Talk that you gave.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, preparing for our interview, and I saw that you enjoy obituaries and
Yes.
eulogies.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird thing to collect, but tell our listeners about that and what you pick up from that type of work.
Okay. Well, I developed, I started this research in about 2007, and my Leading with Wisdom book came out in 2013. And my main career was a college professor of teaching leadership and business management. And I left that career after 30 years. So I only did that for 30 years. And then I taught a graduate course for 10 years. But in the process of doing the research for that book and then the research for Breadcrumb Legacy, I developed a leadership course. And one of the requirements of the course was students had to write their own eulogy. Now, when I started doing this in 2007, 2008, eulogies and obituaries sounded and were different. Obituaries tended to focus on what has someone done or doing, their doing part of life. And eulogies is focused on their being. What kind of person have they been? Now they're sounding more and more the same. And, I have some theories as to, it used to be that newspapers would write obituaries. Now you're writing your own, so you can write whatever you want, So I think there are some reasons for this, but in having students write their own eulogy, and it was a mandatory assignment, it wasn't graded, but they had to do it, and they knew in advance that they were going to share it with the entire class. And the whole purpose of the exercise is to get students to think about, how do I want to be remembered? What would I want people to say about me? And then I would, and the typical students were 21 to 22 years, 21 or 22 undergraduates. And the whole purpose of the exercise was, well, if that's how you want to be remembered, then you need to start living your life like that right now. And the earlier you understand that, the better off you are.
Yeah.
And so, my whole focus is live how you want to be remembered.
From Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the 2 lessons that stood out to me more than any were his exercise where you imagine that you walk into a funeral and there's a coffin there at the front, and you walk up and you realize it's you. And then you sit down in the front row of the church and you listen for the next hour as people get up and they talk about how you would be remembered and what you contributed. And that always stuck with me. The other thing that he shared in that book was the idea of the law of second creation, or all things are created twice, I think is the way that he put it, where first there's a mental creation before there's a physical creation. And I like that idea that we have, that what we think, how we think is what we can manifest in the world. And
Mhm.
but my sister, I was visiting her recently, and she asked me a question that made me think different about legacy. Which she said, "Jason, do you remember great grandma and grandpa's first name?" And I could not remember my great grandparents' first name. Do you remember your great grandparents' first name?
Great grandparents. No,
No.
no,
Yeah.
no.
So in terms of legacy, if we can't even remember their names,
Hmm.
why is it important that we have this idea that our time is significant, meaningful, and important?
Well, that's an excellent question. I would say great grandparents. I mean, I was very close to my grandparents.
Yes.
So I can remember them. I can and so there were life lessons learned there. I mean, I think to me, legacy is a lot about wisdom
Hmm.
and passing on that wisdom and, how far along it go. I mean, sure, we're not, we're not going to be remembered forever by everyone.
Right.
Okay. But if we can have influence on, if I can pass on some things that I remember from my parents and grandparents to my now grandchildren, then, that maybe they'll pass on to their, children, that's a pretty, that's good.
Yeah.
If my kids remember something, as I mentioned, I have a monthly newsletter. I do a monthly podcast myself called where I interview guests called Becoming a Sage. And I look at these things as part of my legacy that, maybe I haven't had a chance to share all of this with my own children. But if I'm not here anymore, they could go back and listen to some of my podcasts, or they could read my monthly newsletter and they would say, oh, that's interesting. She never told me about that. Or I didn't read that newsletter. That was a month I missed it. So,
Yeah. I do think though, when you frame it where you are significant, where you have significance, that you were
mhm,
designed and created for purpose and on purpose, and that you're here for a
mhm.
reason. I think that does impact the way that you live every day. Um,
I do too. I consider this breadcrumb legacy. I say it's often like our North Star, our guiding light. It can keep you in the right lane, in the right mindset.
yeah, and if you were giving advice to all of humanity
Yeah.
on what is needed, and you simplified it down just as much as possible, what would be the advice? How to make sure that you're living a good life now, and that future generations would also enjoy a great life. What would that advice sound like?
Well, it's going to sound very simple, but I think just on a daily basis that you're intentional about what you say it, what you do, how you impact others. Recently, I was giving a workshop, and one of the men said to me, "Don't you find it self-centered and to be thinking about your legacy on a daily basis? That's what you're advocating. Don't you find that self-centered?" And I said, "Well, let's not use the word legacy. Let's use the word impact or influence. Do you think that it's self-centered to be thinking about the influence or impact you're having on others on a daily basis?"
Mm,
And he said, "Oh, no, no." Because again, how we are influencing or impacting others is not always positive. But if we think about it and we're intentional, then we can say, oh, I better not say that. Or, we can have fewer regrets if we're more aware of the difference that we're having on a daily basis.
the greatest teacher, who I believe to be the greatest teacher of all time, I think he thought deeply about what would be needed for mankind to really thrive on earth. And that, for me, that's Jesus, Jan.
Okay.
And
Okay.
and his greatest commandment, I'm just curious your thoughts on this. His greatest commandment, he said, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. What do you think
Yeah.
about that?
No, I like that. I think, yeah,
I mean, if you're
I
gonna
like,
if you're gonna be intentional,
right.
yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
No.
if our great grandkids won't remember our names, but maybe the way that we've treated one another, that there's a
Yes.
compounding effect to that amongst generations.
Yes. Right. And, we all know how polarized the world is right now. And uh,
Is the
I,
world why?
I'm just trying to spread kindness. That's all.
Yeah, why do you say that? This feeling of being polarized, the world being polarized.
I mean, all you have to do is look at, I mean, it's very polarized,
Mm, mm,
very divided. I mean, even, if, I don't want to talk politics, but if you look at the political, the recent political election, it was basically, it's very, very even and very divided. It wasn't lopsided. Yeah.
when you think
In terms of
about
popular vote, but yeah.
when you think about eulogy,
Mhm.
and you've been through this exercise, you've helped people.
Mhm.
What do you want your eulogy to say?
That's an excellent question. And actually, for my 50th birthday, my best friend who knows me better than anyone, because I've always said to her, I want you to be one of the eulogists at my funeral.
Mm,
And so she wrote it, and that was a little while ago. And that was my big gift, birthday gift. And, I think it was very long, it was too long, and she'll revise it. But I would want people to say that, she was outgoing and very kind and giving, always a friend, always there, kind of above and beyond what a lot of people do for friends.
mm-hmm.
Um, you know, uh, I would want people to talk about, or I would hope they would say, she walked the talk.
Mm,
She didn't just talk it. And I think when you're a writer, that's important, but not always so easy. That doesn't make it easy, even walking the talk is not easy, but intentionally trying hard to walk the talk, I think that would be.
yeah, that's good. Relationships are so important, and
Yeah.
life without relationships would not be worth living, I don't think.
Right, right.
And it's harder, I've found, that when people get older to have those relationships. My mentor and my friend Dean used to tell me, he said, Jason, when my kids were young, you were automatically in a relationship with people because you were going to school events and you're going to sporting events and you're going to birthday parties and got all this stuff. And he said, and then he said afterwards, then for him and his wife, they were plugged into a church for a time. And so that created community for them. And then they moved and they didn't have a church to belong to anymore. And he said, Jason, it's really hard to find community and be in relationships. I was talking to a woman recently who she is in a great position financially, and she would like to travel, but she has nobody to travel with. And so it's just not the same to go travel by yourself. So when you think about relationships and connecting with people at this next phase of life, how do you do that? How do you create those relationships?
Well, that's interesting because I've written several articles for Forbes about this topic. People could just, if they just put in Jann Freed Forbes, a link will come up with all the articles I've written, and I've written 2 or 3 about making friends as grown-ups, making friends as adults, how to make friends. So again, I list all kinds of ideas in there because you are absolutely right, Jason. It is much more difficult, okay, to make friends. We call it front end loaded. So when you're younger, friendships are front end loaded
Mm,
and exactly like you said, through our kids, athletic events and all that. It's much harder for adults. And part of it has to do with our comfort zone. It's hard for us to get out of our comfort zone. So we tend to be creatures of habit. And you really have to be intentional and take risks and be more vulnerable in order to build new relationships.
what would be an
But
example? What would be an example of risks and being vulnerable?
okay. Getting out of your comfort zone. Actually, somebody just asked me that in a workshop, and I said, getting out of your comfort zone is a way which just means doing something that is not second nature to you. So maybe you're not good at initiating, but you have someone, well, I'll give you a perfect example. So we've had some turnover in our neighborhood and a lot of new neighbors. And I was feeling bad. Here I'm writing these articles and I don't know some of my neighbors. So another neighbor and I said, would you be willing to co-host a cocktail party. We're just going to have appetizers and some drinks and 5 to 7 on a Sunday night. And we're going to invite neighbors we don't know.
Mm.
And and just around the block. So we walked around the block. I hand wrote invitations. 5 and almost, I think one couple did not come.
Oh, is that right? Everybody came. So
What
I think that really speaks to this idea that
about-
everybody's longing for this connection in this interconnected world. People don't feel like they're connected.
Exactly. And so I think we had about 30 people. One couple had a conflict. They didn't have to bring anything, so it was real easy. And I had name tags and I made some announcements. I said, if you talk to your neighbors and they weren't invited, it's because we know them. You were invited because we don't know you. And it was just to kind of break the ice. So that again, that was taking a risk. I was being vulnerable. But I was being very transparent and it was good. So now, so the whole idea is a lot of people don't know their neighbors. And so planning something like that. I've also, like a few years ago, I hosted a potluck where I said, my husband and I will have the main dish. It was for a block party. We called it a block party, but again, it's not an annual thing. We just made it up. And we said, again, I walked around the block with, put a flyer in their mailbox and said, bring a dish, we'll have a main dish. And I think I said, bring a dish and a beverage and we'll have the main dish. And again, we had just a lot of people.
Mm.
So those are just examples of, reaching out, taking the initiative. For me, it wasn't necessarily out of my comfort zone, but for a lot of people, it would be.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people might, and actually what's interesting is a lot of people, when we had this last event, which was just last summer, I mean, almost everybody said, great idea. Wish I would have thought of it, or I've wanted to do this, but didn't do it, So people really did appreciate it. So that's just an example.
That's great. My newest hobby the last couple of years has been playing pickleball. Have you tried playing yet?
Yeah, I have some bad knees.
Okay.
So I'm a little scared, but yes, I've played it. Yes.
Well,
But I also know, Jason, I also know several people, even younger than me, who've gotten hurt, broke a wrist, cracked something. So anyway, watch out. But
I know
anyway, go
those.
ahead.
I know those stories too. Yeah, I think we're all going to get hurt eventually. You're either going to get hurt
Yeah.
from being active, or you're going to get hurt from sitting on the couch for too long.
There you go. There you go.
But the thing I love about pickleball, Jann, is it does what you're talking about, and I think one of the reasons it's really grown in popularity is it creates community. There's really
Sure.
no cost associated with it because most of the places we play are free. You buy equipment one time and then you're done. But you get to meet all these wonderful people and you get to play and have fun. And there's no discussions about politics or any of these things that can be divisive. It's just, well, I guess if there's divisiveness, it's, you called that shot out and it was really in,
Right.
But,
Yeah.
but
No, that's good. That's good.
yeah, I see it as something that's fun. It's not just a way to get together and eat, but it's a way to actually play. And
Yeah.
I actually saw that our U.S. Surgeon General wrote an article about how, as Americans, we've forgotten just how to have fun, how to play.
Right.
And it's so much easier just to sit on the couch and kind of screen through or, flip through social media.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You're right. You're very correct.
You've done a lot of this research. You've taught on these subjects about living a meaningful life, leadership. What's the most important thing when you're done with a class or you've coached people one-on-one on this idea? What really resonates with them? Like what moves the needle for them in their life and gets them to maybe make things better for themselves?
I honestly think that it is this whole concept of embracing death. Because when you embrace death, then you're freer to live. So that's another reason why you're more likely to take risks or get out of your comfort zone if you know that, well, it could be over tomorrow. It could end next week. I mean, you just don't know. I'm going to a funeral. I'm going to a funeral tomorrow. And it's a friend of ours, a good friend of ours, who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and in less than a month was gone.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you just don't know. You don't know. And I think that whole concept of becoming comfortable with the idea that really today could be the end. So how am I going to live it? And how am I going to, cherish it? And what am I going to do that really makes it worthwhile.
Does it have the potential, though, to live recklessly?
I don't think so. I think more intentionally,
Mm.
but reckless, I guess it's however somebody wants to be remembered, if they want to take more, I do think that, you know, it doesn't mean skydiving. I'm not ever going to skydive, I don't think, but, take calculus. I've never thought of that. I think if somebody's a big risk taker, maybe, but, I think it's more a matter of living intentionally, not recklessly.
Hmm. Hmm. And when you write articles for Forbes, what are the articles that have really stood out the most, or have been read the most, or do they track that information for you?
Yeah, they do. It's very interesting. It is very interesting. A lot of it, I think, has to do with the title.
Mm.
So I'm kind of really trying to, but one of my very first articles, it has like 200,000 page views now.
Wow.
Okay. And it was one of my first, and the article, the title is three reasons not to retire.
3 reasons not to retire.
Yeah. And so it's kind of a play on, it's kind of the reverse of what you might think.
Ah,
And so what I've discovered in titles is it needs to be a little more intriguing.
and
Uh,
but I'm
and
curious, I am curious to know what those 3 reasons are. What are 3 reasons to not retire, or 1 or 2 of them at least?
Yeah. Um, I've done so much writing, Jason. I'm trying to think, what did I say? 3 reasons not to retire. Well, okay. Part of it is like on my podcast, I say that I'm out to retire the word retirement. We're not retiring. We're not retiring from life,
Mm.
moving on. And so that's what I talk about in that article, that,
Ah,
that you may not be working full time, but what are you doing that gives you purpose and meaning? It
mhm,
was along those lines that,
mhm.
you know, because the whole idea of retirement was created when people didn't live that long.
Yeah, why are we retiring? Why are we doing
Yeah,
this?
we're not retiring, Now we may not be doing, like I left my full-time job after 30 years and I'm doing other things. Now I'm doing some for money, but I'm also very involved in the community. Um, and anyway, but we're not retiring from life. We're
Uh-huh.
going to be doing something. And what is that something that you want to do?
Yeah.
So,
From a financial standpoint, how did you know it was okay to leave your full-time career?
well, my husband's a wealth advisor. So he's a wealth management advisor. So, what we do he does financial plans and,
Oh, so
but,
you have that dialed in. That was easy.
yeah, we have that dialed in.
Is he
But we
retired? Is he
also,
retired also?
no, he loves what he does.
Mm.
So, but we also waited until our 3 sons were out of college. So we
Mm.
felt like we had launched them and now it was more my turn to take a risk.
Okay.
So,
And then when you first pulled the plug and you no longer were teaching, what did you do, or what did you do with your time that when you first retired?
so now I was teaching, then I had an opportunity to teach a graduate course for the local university where I was just totally teaching undergraduates at a small liberal arts. So I taught this graduate course, but it was just 1 course a year. And then that's when I developed my coaching practice. And then that's when I started marketing myself as workshops. So I do leadership workshops.
Mm.
So I have a workshop that I'm very excited about called Beyond the Money,
Mm.
where
Mm.
it's a corporate workshop where organizations hire me to come in and talk about the non-financial aspects of retirement. Because again, if people have enough money, it's everything else they're worried about.
Mhm.
And organizations are uh, it's very common for organizations to bring in financial advisors to give financial advice. But it's also just as important, I think, to prepare people for the non-financial aspect of retirement.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
so that's what my workshop is. It's called Beyond the Money. And then I tailor it to, like, one insurance agency brought me in to talk to all employees And I had 3 different levels of employees, 25 to 35, 35 to 50, and 50 plus. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Jann, I sure have appreciated you taking the time out of your schedule to be a guest on the show today. I know that some of our listeners are going to want to reach out to you and learn more about the work you're doing. What's the best place for them to find you?
Thank you very much. Well, my website is jannfreed.com, Jann with 2 N's, Freed with 2 E's, and then LinkedIn. I'm very active in LinkedIn. And as I mentioned, and they can just do a search for me on LinkedIn, but I mentioned that I have a monthly newsletter. So if they go to my website, something would pop up, and if they subscribe with their email, they would get a monthly newsletter and a monthly podcast, and that's it.
Okay.
So,
that's awesome.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, that'd be wonderful. So,
well, very
and
good.
again, they can do, if they do a search, just Jann Freed Forbes, all of my Forbes articles would come up, and I'm very excited about that.
Oh, this is great. I really appreciate the work that you're doing to help give people more clarity about how they're going to spend their time and what's most important to them, and what it really means to leave a legacy, and why that's a motivator for people. And so I appreciate this conversation. Thanks for being a guest on Sound Retirement Radio.
I'm very honored. Thanks, Jason.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Sound Retirement Radio. For articles, links, and resources from today's show, visit soundretirementplanning.com. If you enjoy the podcast, share it with a friend and give us a 5-star review. Ready to kickstart your retirement planning? Head over to retirementbudgetcalculator.com. Need assistance with investment management? Explore our services at parker-financial.net. Information and opinions expressed here are believed to be accurate and complete, for general information only, and should not be construed as specific tax, legal, or financial advice for any individual, and does not constitute a solicitation for any securities or insurance products. Please consult with your financial professional before taking action on anything discussed in this program. Parker Financial, its representatives, or its affiliates have no liability for investment decisions or other actions taken or made by you based on the information provided in this program. All insurance-related discussions are subject to the claims-paying ability of the company. Investing involves risk. Jason Parker is the president of Parker Financial, LLC, an independent, fee-based wealth management firm located at 9230 Bayshore Drive Northwest, Suite 201, Silverdale, Washington. For additional information, call 360-337-2701 or visit us online at soundretirementplanning.com.